In the first trial in years involving a Chicago police officer, Officer Dante Servin has been acquitted. Fatal off-duty shooting that he was involved in, charged with involuntary manslaughter. Prosecutors allege that he was reckless when in March of 2012, he fired shots over his shoulder from inside his car in the direction of four people who had their backs to him in a dark West Side alley. And Servin's attorney said he was fearing for his life after Antonio Cross, one of those four people, pulled an object from his waistband, pointed it at Servin, and ran towards his car. But police ultimately found only a cell phone. Now, there was a 22-year-old woman who, in the craziness of the officer firing over his shoulder, was shot in the back of the head and killed, while the actual individual who supposedly pulled the maybe weapon from his waistband was grazed in the hand and suffered no other injuries. Only Cross ended up being charged with anything after the shooting, but we did see a charge for involuntary manslaughter come against the police officer. That officer was acquitted by Cook County Judge Dennis Porter, and it was kind of an acquittal almost on a legal technicality. The judge said prosecutors didn't prove that the off-duty officer acted recklessly, that this death of Ms. Boyd, 22 years old, was a reckless action by the officer, because Illinois courts have consistently said if an individual points a gun at an intended victim and shoots, that it is an intentional act and thus not a reckless one. Have you ever heard, Lewis, of a technicality like this excusing behavior, right? If you point a gun at someone, you're intentionally pointing the gun, and by definition, it is not reckless, which means it cannot be involuntary manslaughter.
So does this mean that there will be a different charge levied against him? I'm confused.
Okay.
Because,
yeah.
Go ahead.
So the judge essentially all but said that prosecutors should have charged Servin, the officer, with murder rather than involuntary manslaughter, because it would not have included this reckless requirement that involuntary manslaughter has. Unfortunately, Servin cannot be retried on a murder charge because of double jeopardy protections, according to Darren O'Brien, because it would be the same actions, which would merely be tried again under a different statute, but it would be the same actions, the same set of evidence. So presumably, if we are to believe the defense attorney, no, we could not see another charge here.
That's fascinating. Do you think we have a case where the judge is just kind of trying to help out the police department and the city?
Not necessarily. I mean, that is how the law is written, and there have been questions as to whether the prosecutors selected the right charge. The counterpoint to this, and the prosecutors have said, we were very careful in deciding that this was going to be charged. This was going to be a charge of involuntary manslaughter rather than murder. They say that this was the right charge. You have to consider that it's also pretty damn tough to get a cop on murder in a case like this. So maybe they thought it was a better shot with going with involuntary manslaughter.
They probably thought that they had a better chance. Unfortunately, I guess they didn't do their research enough.
Well, the family of the victim, Rekia Boyd, erupted in the courtroom after the verdict, and one individual, the brother of the victim, actually taking some steps towards the police officer on trial and angrily shouting, "This blank killed my sister." Someone threw what looked like a lunch bag at the officer as he was walking towards a parking garage. First trial of a police officer in Chicago in a long time, and an acquittal on what is essentially a technicality. Now, some people would say there's no such thing as loopholes and technicalities in the law. The law is written in a particular way, and if an action does not fall under the definition as written, then that is just someone who is not guilty of that crime, plain and simple. A more kind of nuanced understanding of the law tells us that's certainly often not the case, particularly when you consider the disproportionality of when certain charges are applied and the guilty, not guilty percentages based on someone's position of power, for example, race of the perpetrator and or victim. We see the inconsistencies.
And we ask ourselves all the time, is there a better way to do this when we see something like this happen? And I don't really know the answer. I mean, can we completely revamp the system?
I don't know. That certainly would be no easy task. That's for sure.